The morning sun cast long shadows through the towering windows of Jefferson County Courthouse, where Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood quietly in line, clutching her leather briefcase. She had rushed here straight from her morning rounds, still wearing her professional navy blue suit beneath her white doctor's coat. The marble floors echoed with footsteps as people hustled through security, but Sarah remained calm despite being late for her hearing. At 45, Sarah had worked too hard to let a simple traffic violation rattle her. Her journey from a struggling inner-city student to becoming one of the country's most skilled neurosurgeons had taught her patience. Yet something about today felt different. Perhaps it was the whispers she'd heard about Judge Richard Thompson's reputation. The courtroom itself was intimidating, with its dark wood panels and high ceilings that seemed to judge everyone who entered. Sarah noticed she was the only person of color among the morning's defendants. As she waited for her case to be called, she observed Judge Thompson's interactions with other defendants. The elderly white judge, with his steel gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, showed remarkable leniency toward some while being unusually harsh with others. The pattern wasn't subtle. Case number 247, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, traffic violation, the court clerk announced, her voice echoing through the chamber. Sarah approached the podium with dignity, her heels clicking against the floor. Judge Thompson barely looked up from his papers, his mouth set in a thin line of disapproval. When he finally raised his eyes, his expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a mixture of surprise and something else Sarah had seen too many times before. "You're late," he interrupted before she could speak, his voice carrying a sharp edge that made several observers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Your Honor, I apologize. I was in emergency surgery this morning and—" "Surgery?" Judge Thompson scoffed, removing his glasses and looking at her with obvious skepticism. "And what kind of surgery would that be?" The condescension in his voice was clear. Several people in the gallery exchanged uncomfortable glances, while the court reporter's fingers hesitated over her keyboard. The tension in the room grew thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Sarah stood straighter, her voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath her professional demeanor. She had faced prejudice throughout her career, but something about this moment, about being judged before she could even explain herself, struck a deeper nerve. The morning light streaming through the high windows created a spotlight effect, illuminating Sarah's poised figure while Judge Thompson sat in his shadowy perch, unaware that his next few minutes would become a turning point in his 20-year career on the bench. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of his long-held beliefs and change the course of justice in Jefferson County forever. The court clerk shuffled through some papers, a nervous energy radiating from her movements. She kept glancing between Sarah and the judge, clearly aware of the growing tension. Little did Judge Thompson know that the small manila folder in front of the clerk contained information that would soon make him question everything he thought he knew about the woman standing before him. "I'm a neurosurgeon at Metro General," Sarah explained calmly, though her heart raced beneath her composed exterior. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she pulled out her hospital ID badge. Judge Thompson's eyes narrowed, his wrinkled hand dismissively waving away her attempt to provide proof. "A traffic violation is a traffic violation," he drawled, leaning back in his leather chair. "Your claimed profession doesn't excuse running a stop sign." The pause before claimed hung in the air like smoke, making several observers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah had seen that look before, the subtle disbelief, the assumption that she couldn't possibly be who she said she was. 20 years of medical practice, and still, some people couldn't see past their own prejudices. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had rushed through that stop sign because a teenage gunshot victim needed emergency surgery. "Your Honor, if I may explain the circumstances," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the frustration building in her chest. "I've heard enough excuses today." Judge Thompson cut her off, shuffling papers on his desk without making eye contact. "This is the third time this year you've been cited for traffic violations. It seems you have a pattern of disregard for the law." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Those citations had been dismissed. They were cases of mistaken identity. Another black woman with a similar car. She opened her mouth to protest, but the judge continued his tirade. The gallery had grown unusually quiet. Even the usual shuffle of papers and whispered conversations had ceased. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keyboard, her eyes darting between the judge and Dr. Mitchell. The tension in the room was palpable, like the moments before a thunderstorm. In fact, Judge Thompson continued, his voice taking on a theatrical quality, as if he were performing for the gallery. "I think it's time someone taught you about responsibility and respect for the law." He peered over his glasses, his lips curled in what could almost be described as a smirk. Sarah stood her ground, her back straight, hands clasped in front of her. She'd faced countless life or death situations in the operating room, but this blatant injustice made her pulse quicken in a different way. Through the windows, clouds passed over the sun, casting shifting shadows across the courtroom floor. The court clerk had begun frantically flipping through a folder, her movements becoming increasingly urgent. She had recognized something, a detail that the judge had overlooked in his haste to pass judgment. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared to interrupt the proceedings, knowing that what she was about to reveal would change everything. Judge Thompson reached for his gavel, ready to deliver what he clearly thought would be an exemplary sentence. The wooden handle gleamed under the courthouse lights, a symbol of authority that he had wielded for 2 decades. But fate, in the form of his eager-to-please clerk, was about to deal him a humbling lesson in assumptions and prejudice. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier with each passing second. The spectators, other defendants, and even the bailiff seemed to hold their breath, aware they were witnessing something significant, though they couldn't yet know just how momentous this ordinary traffic court session would become. Just as Judge Thompson lifted his gavel, the court clerk practically jumped from her seat. "Your Honor," she called out, her voice cracking with urgency. "There's something you need to see." She hurried forward, her sensible shoes squeaking against the polished floor, clutching a newspaper clipping that had fallen from Dr. Mitchell's file. The judge's face twisted with annoyance at the interruption. "Ms. Jenkins, what could be so important that you—" His words died in his throat as his eyes fell on the newspaper's headline. "Groundbreaking surgery saves judge's granddaughter. Dr. Sarah Mitchell performs medical miracle." Color drained from Judge Thompson's face as recognition dawned. The paper trembled in his hands as he stared at the photograph. Dr. Sarah Mitchell in surgical scrubs, standing next to a smiling teenage girl in a hospital bed. His granddaughter, Emily. The courtroom remained silent, but the air crackled with electric tension. Those in the gallery leaned forward, sensing the shift in atmosphere. The bailiff, who had been half dozing by the door, straightened up, suddenly alert to the unfolding drama. Judge Thompson's eyes darted between the article and the woman standing before him. Dr. Mitchell's expression remained neutral, professional, though something flickered in her dark eyes. Not triumph, but a quiet dignity that made the judge's earlier condescension seem even more shameful. You're that Dr. Mitchell," he managed to stammer, his judicial authority crumbling like autumn leaves. The same hands that had so dismissively waved away her credentials now gripped his desk for support. The clicking of the court reporter's keyboard had stopped entirely. Everyone waited, barely breathing, as Sarah finally spoke. "Yes, Your Honor. I performed Emily's emergency surgery 3 months ago. She had a rare arteriovenous malformation, a brain condition that could have been fatal without immediate intervention." Memories flooded back to Judge Thompson. The terrifying late-night phone call, rushing to the hospital, the endless hours in the waiting room. He remembered a calm voice explaining the complicated procedure, skilled hands gesturing as they described the delicate operation. But he had never really looked at the surgeon's face, too consumed with worry for his granddaughter. The newspaper article continued to mock him from his desk. Dr. Mitchell's innovative surgical technique has been lauded by medical professionals worldwide. Her approach to this complicated procedure has set new standards in pediatric neurosurgery. Someone coughed in the back of the courtroom, the sound echoing off the high ceiling like an accusation. Judge Thompson's wire-rimmed glasses caught the light as he lowered his head, the weight of his prejudiced assumptions crushing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. The silence in the courtroom shattered as Judge Thompson dropped his gavel, his hands shaking. "Emily," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Emily would have died without you." The memory of that night came rushing back, his granddaughter's pale face, the frantic beeping of hospital machines, the terrifying words, "brain hemorrhage." He remembered pacing the hospital corridors, praying for a miracle. That miracle had come in the form of the very woman he'd just been ready to unfairly sentence. Sarah watched as the judge's face transformed, years of ingrained prejudice battling with the undeniable truth before him. She remembered Emily well, a bright 16-year-old with dreams of becoming a scientist. The surgery had been challenging, requiring every ounce of skill and concentration she possessed. 14 hours, Sarah said quietly, breaking the tense silence. That's how long the surgery took. Emily never gave up. She fought hard, just like her grandfather, the judge who raised her after her parents passed. Judge Thompson's eyes filled with tears. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the usually stern man struggled to maintain his composure. His granddaughter's words from her hospital bed echoed in his mind. "The doctor with the kind eyes saved me, Grandpa. She held my hand before the surgery and promised everything would be okay." The bailiff shifted uncomfortably, while the court clerk dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The morning sun streaming through the windows seemed to spotlight this moment of transformation, this collision of prejudice and reality. "You stayed with her," Judge Thompson said, his voice barely audible. "After the surgery, you stayed until she woke up. I remember now. You were there, explaining everything to us. But I never really saw you." Sarah nodded, remembering those tense hours after surgery. "Every patient deserves our full attention and care, Your Honor. Their lives are in our hands, regardless of who they are or who their family might be." The weight of her words hung in the air. Other defendants in the gallery exchanged meaningful glances. Here was a woman who had saved the judge's beloved granddaughter. Yet moments ago, he had been ready to throw the book at her over a minor traffic violation, simply because of the color of her skin. Judge Thompson removed his glasses, wiping them with a handkerchief, a nervous gesture that seemed to give him time to gather his thoughts. When he put them back on, he looked at Sarah Mitchell as if seeing her for the first time, not as a stereotype, not as a defendant, but as the brilliant surgeon who had given his family a second chance. The morning light caught the silver threads in his hair, highlighting how old and vulnerable he suddenly appeared. His authority, so formidable just moments before, had crumbled in the face of this revelation. The change in him was visible to everyone present, a man forced to confront his own biases in the most personal way possible. In the sun-filled courtroom, Judge Thompson's hands gripped his desk as he visibly struggled with emotions he'd never displayed in his 20 years on the bench. The transformation playing across his weathered face was like watching ice melt in spring. Slow at first, then all at once. "Dr. Mitchell," he began, his voice carrying a tremor that hadn't been there before. "I've been sitting in this chair for 2 decades, passing judgment on people's lives. Today, I realize I've been looking without seeing." The gallery watched, transfixed, as the judge rose from his seat, something he rarely did during proceedings. The simple action seemed to age him, as if the weight of his realizations pressed down on his shoulders. He stepped down from the bench, each footfall echoing in the silent courtroom. 3 months ago, when Emily was rushed to the hospital, I prayed for God to send us the best doctor possible." His voice cracked. "He did, but today I almost let my prejudices overshadow that blessing." Sarah stood quietly, her professional demeanor intact, though her eyes held a mix of compassion and determination. She'd seen this moment of recognition before in others, but rarely with such public impact. The court clerk wiped away tears, while even the usually stoic bailiff looked moved. Through the tall windows, clouds parted, sending shafts of sunlight across the wooden floors, as if nature itself was illuminating this moment of change. "Your Honor," Sarah finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm, "every day in the operating room, I see that we're all the same under our skin. Life and death don't care about color or status. They only care about our actions." Judge Thompson nodded slowly, years of ingrained beliefs crumbling like old courthouse plaster. "In medicine, you look at the person, not their appearance," he said thoughtfully, "while I, a man tasked with delivering justice, have been doing exactly the opposite." The tension in the courtroom had transformed from hostile to healing. Other defendants, who had been watching their phones or staring at the floor, now sat up straight, witnessing what felt like a historic moment in their small county courthouse. "How many others?" the judge asked, more to himself than anyone else. "How many others have I judged unfairly from this bench?" His voice echoed off the high ceilings, the question hanging in the air like smoke. Judge Thompson stood in the middle of his courtroom, a position he'd never taken before. His judicial robe seemed to weigh heavier than usual as he turned to address not just Dr. Mitchell, but the entire courtroom. "Dr. Mitchell, I owe you more than an apology," he began, his voice carrying the weight of decades of realization. "I owe you my granddaughter's life. And yet minutes ago, I was ready to punish you unjustly without even looking at your full case." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows, painting stripes across the wooden floor like prison bars, a symbolism not lost on those present. The regular tick of the wall clock seemed to pause, as if time itself was holding its breath. "In my years on this bench, I've prided myself on upholding justice," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "But today, I'm forced to acknowledge that my definition of justice has been tainted by prejudices I didn't even want to admit I had." Sarah watched as the man before her seemed to age and grow younger simultaneously, aged by the weight of his revelation, but rejuvenated by the promise of change. The other defendants in the gallery leaned forward, witnesses to an unprecedented moment of judicial humility. "Your Honor," Sarah responded, her voice carrying the same calm authority she used in the operating room. "Recognition is the first step toward healing, whether it's in medicine or in justice." Judge Thompson nodded, a slight smile touching his lips for the first time that day. "Case dismissed," he declared, but then added, "No, that's not enough. I'm ordering a full review of my past sentencing decisions, particularly in cases involving minorities." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The court clerk's pen clattered to the floor, the sound echoing like an exclamation point to the judge's declaration. The bailiff's usual stoic expression gave way to raised eyebrows and a slight nod of approval. Furthermore, Judge Thompson continued, surprising even himself, "I'm requesting a formal investigation into potential bias in our county's judicial system. It's time we performed surgery on our own prejudices, Dr. Mitchell. And like you, we must be thorough and leave no stone unturned." 1 month after the courthouse incident, Jefferson County's judicial system looked remarkably different. Judge Thompson's courtroom, once known for its harsh sentences, had become a model for fairness and reform. The judge sat in his office, reviewing a stack of old cases. On his wall hung a framed newspaper article about Dr. Mitchell's groundbreaking surgery, next to a new diversity training certificate. His phone buzzed, a text from Emily, sharing her latest physical therapy progress. "The next case on the diversity review panel is ready, Your Honor," his clerk announced, poking her head in. The panel, established after the incident with Dr. Mitchell, had already identified dozens of cases requiring review. Several convictions had been overturned, lives restored. Down the hall, a training session was underway. Judges from neighboring counties filled the conference room, listening intently as Judge Thompson shared his story. "One traffic violation changed everything," he explained, his voice carrying the wisdom of hard-learned lessons. "It took a brilliant neurosurgeon to help me see the tumor of prejudice in our justice system." At Metro General Hospital, Dr. Sarah Mitchell's story had spread, inspiring other professionals to speak up against discrimination. Her case had become required reading in legal ethics courses at the state university. Students discussed how one moment of truth could spark systemic change. Local news crews gathered outside the courthouse as Judge Thompson announced the establishment of the Mitchell Fairness Initiative, a comprehensive program to monitor and prevent judicial bias. Dr. Mitchell stood beside him at the podium, their unlikely partnership a powerful symbol of transformation. Change, Judge Thompson told the cameras, is like brain surgery. It requires precision, courage, and the willingness to look deeper than the surface. Sometimes it takes a painful incision to remove what's harmful and heal what's broken. In his private moments, the judge often reflected on how close he'd come to making a terrible mistake that day. His granddaughter, Emily, now fully recovered, had become an advocate for diversity in medicine, inspired by both her grandfather's transformation and the doctor who saved her life. The courthouse steps, where the story began, now bore a small plaque. Justice sees no color. Below it, smaller text read, "In honor of the day prejudice was given a life-saving diagnosis."